first year of university and college that people are incorporating these in university departments. So you might take a beginning chemistry course, or maybe a more advanced artificial intelligence course, even within your regular university environment. What these courses don't do is they don't have assessment at the level that somebody could say, I know this subject. You might get a certificate. You might be able to say to an employer, hey, I took that course along with 10,000 other people. But they're not replacing traditional education, but they're changing the notion, the social notion of learning. And I think the important thing today is that the social aspect of learning, how we find things, what we do to support our learning, how we share it with each other, and then how that gets recorded is a thing. So in the open world, the MOOCs are there. You'll hear more about them. I think, in truth, they're more a form of publication than they are a course. So in other words, a professor in one of these universities does a MOOC as a form of publication. You all know that there's open software, Moodle, and other kinds of solutions that are out there. There's a difference in some ways between what that software does in the type of information and social environment we just talked about in the MOOC. But there's certainly a lot going on in the open source world. Now, the open education resource world, the Tech de Monterrey has done a tremendous job, and others, in putting materials out that are free. What hasn't happened, though, is that those materials have not been made very accessible. They're not easily cataloged. It's hard to find them in a library sense. It's hard to even search for them on Google. So we've done a really bad job in the open education resource world of being able to find things and know where to place them. So I asked this author, I have a terrible habit. When I read a book I really care about, I call the guy. I think more people should do this. I got in touch with this man. He's a wonderful history professor at the University of Oregon. He's now the vice provost for academic affairs for undergraduate. He said the university is not going away. So the laboratory is here to stay. And he's watching some of these new forms evolve. And we've gotten into quite a dialogue about this. All right, so I want to talk about how these new forms challenge the old structure. And again, if you have a question, put a hand up. Otherwise, I'm assuming that on your campuses, you're seeing some questions. What do I do with Facebook? What do I do with Twitter? And so forth. I'm now going to turn on my device. I'm sorry that my Spanish... Okay, there we go. Was there... Okay. I'm not getting anywhere with questions. Okay. So let me move on to the next section. So I want to jump forward. I got very frustrated in getting my own children educated in a way that I thought would be helpful to them in the future. I wasn't content that the school was the only way to get educated, certainly not in a very wired world. I also had a rule in our house. If you weren't using the computer half the time to create, your computing time would get cut in half. And I provided all the software. So my two oldest boys learned to program by the time they were 9 or 10. And they don't even think about programming and web design as anything different than I think from writing longhand or talking on the phone. And as I was helping them explore other subjects, to me, their interests, what they were interested in, had to be something to propel their education. So I was thinking about that. At the same time, because through Blackboard and other jobs, I visited so many universities, I was thinking, what's next? And so, that's not me. So we established this organization and took a leap forward to say, what could we look at the process of learning in a different way? And you know there's a difference. Education is a formal structure. Often governments are involved. Learning is what people do. Technology right now is somewhere in the middle. So education, technology, and learning. And if we're not motivated, we don't do well. So we asked some really basic questions. What if I was a Martian? Maybe I am. Landed on this planet and said, what are the real questions we need to ask in 2013? And they're very basic questions. So how do we learn to constantly learn? How do we utilize the global information structure? How do we organize education? Are institutions the only answer? And then, how do we produce productive societies? In the United States, as in elsewhere, our high school dropout rate is going up. We are being successful in getting more students of all types to enter college, but they're not staying. We now know in the States that if you don't have 1 year or 2 years of education, this is pretty well developed, your salary level is going to drop considerably. Your opportunity level is going to drop. So we decided that the university, think about this for a second. Remember, in our history, there are disciplines. We all are in different disciplines. There's an administration, and in your case, in some of your cases, there are administrative services. But the university, as an institution, very rarely comes together across those disciplines to look at problems. Education is a problem. Energy is a problem. The environment is a problem. There are global challenges that everybody will live with that not only are problems, but they're opportunities. So, very important, we said, let's look at neuroscience. What's going on in the brain? Let's look at information systems. The world's awash in information and data. How does it play a role? Organizational theory. We sort of put this one in the background for a while. It's, you know, when you see a corporation that works really well, an IBM, an Amazon, they have organized to do that. It takes a lot of work to make that happen. And then finally, economics is turning into a very interesting field in that it's not just about the money, it's about how people decide and make decisions. It's about marketing, it's about a number of things, and it's about healthy societies. So we've organized people, literally different faculty members at different universities, to say, every so often there's a good paper about how the brain works, how memory works, how we form concepts. You know how when you have a problem you can remember somebody's face, just like that, but you can't remember their name, and you go through this path in your brain, and you pick out this association and that association. Well, your brain works in certain ways. It wasn't designed in the beginning to deal with numbers and letters. So a lot of education is learning how to be comfortable with those symbols. There's a lot of research going on how the brain does that. And we also know when somebody learns something, and I don't know what the word is in Spanish, but we have an aha moment. I got it. Okay? That's a brain function. There's a pleasure center in the brain that responds to certain things. Food, you know what, a couple other things. When you learn something and you have that aha feeling, there is an emotion involved, that helps the memory. So those things are being studied now. We will know more in the future. Coming back to technology, we will know how to make the technology work with this. There's already a company in San Jose, California, where you wear a little thing around your head, and it measures your brain waves. It measures, you know, how interested you are in what you're actually looking at on the page, and it can show the student when their mind starts to wander, and they can come back. So a lot going on in that area. We know the Internet's everywhere, and I think you're experiencing the same thing here with Google or anything else. The amount of data mining that's done on us, every time you log onto your phone or onto your computer and you go somewhere, if you buy something online if you look up a sporting event, whatever you're doing, there are hundreds of algorithms and companies that are analyzing what's going on, and they're creating patterns, and those patterns will come back, and you'll see an ad show up that you didn't expect. Okay? We're all familiar with this. That technology is 3 or 4 generations ahead of anything that we use in education. So the question might be, why? When you look up something on Google, or if you're using Gmail or another email system, and it knows the other people you're working with automatically because it's analyzing that text. It's called natural language, the science. That could be available in education. It's not right now. Could be, should be. So tremendous amount going on with networks. A student just sitting at their computer, studies for a little while, communicates with a friend, plays a game for a little bit, goes on the web, looks up something. That's a pattern. We will be researching and looking at how those patterns work. I thought once it would be interesting, you know, the navigation software that people use when they drive. Now it's on the smartphone, but the navigation units. What if you had, I guess I won't turn my head. What if you had your subject matters laid out like towns in central Mexico? You know, you had your math here, you had your English you're learning here, you had something else. We haven't explored how to use the interface of the computer very well. We're still very far away from that. So there's a lot to be done in that world. Then there's a big challenge about how we organize ourselves. So right now there are debates on all of your campuses. How many courses should be put online? Should all of them be put online? Should they only be used for certain courses? Should we put some programs online? I would say 2 years from now, that won't be a conversation anymore. You will create online, and you or your students will make the decision how they consume that knowledge and learning. But right now, we're organized into separate little units. Oh, those are the online guys. Oh, we're using online, but we're not using it everywhere. Well, that's going to change. So how we organize to do that is very important. Some faculty members are comfortable with technology. Others aren't. But the faculty member who says they're not comfortable with technology is undoubtedly on their cell phone all day long. They're looking up things on that smartphone or on their tablet. So where's the discomfort? Also, students, we're not using the intergenerational piece. If I have a question, I go to my 14-year-old. If he'll answer the question, I'll get what I need. I might have to ask somebody else to ask him, but I'll end up with an answer. So how we organize is critically important. And finally is, what's the outcome? You know, what are we looking for? I think that we all know that we have problems. The internet has not only created opportunities, it's created terrible problems. So people who are organizing to cause trouble, whether they're organized politically, whether they're criminal and economic in what they're doing, there's a tremendous amount that's going on that also has to be countered. We need a better, healthier society along with better educated people. So it's not simply getting an education to get a job. We have to get an education to be in a better world, and we have to work at that. I have my oldest son is 23. He got out of college, and he's now got a job, and he said, is this what it's all about? And I said to him, to a certain extent, but where's your responsibility to do more, to do something good? All right. So again, we're trying to rethink into the future. And I'm happy to take questions later, or if you have emails, I'll put my email up later. I'd love to be able to get on campuses and challenge these questions. And administrators need to be in these discussions. The people who are managing the technology need to be in these conversations. And the people who are in charge of the academic subjects need to be. The question is, how does that world become very similar to the social world that we know online? All right, so I've been looking at how we turn this theory into practice. And you see up at the top line, I've taken neuroscience and equated it with learning. I've taken information and equated it with networks. I've taken organization and created and made it associated with analytics, which would be how we analyze data, how we look for patterns. And I've taken economics and put it in terms of productivity, and I would say both for the nature of society and also economic productivity. Then on the bottom line, I've said, what do these things turn into? Okay, so the things on the bottom line you're all pretty familiar with. There's mobile technology, social technology. We're hoping for greater access, how we manage better. Down the information, you know, the cloud is everywhere. By the way, it's the heaviest cloud you can ever imagine. The data centers that manage our ease to get in and out of the internet are just huge complexes filled with hundreds of thousands of servers. They themselves present challenges, but it's interesting that the word cloud is used. How the network's used on your campus. One of the problems in education today is that there's so many different applications. How do you keep them all straight? How do you sign on to them? How do you make sure that data flows between them? And then the rising world of open content, open learning. How does that get organized in some better way? And when you think about that open world, if it were running through, there was a Google for open education, you'd be able to find things in minutes and seconds, and you'd know what they were associated with. That's coming. I've just talked recently. I live near Silicon Valley in California, and so I go in and out of there because part of my job in my mind is to understand what the new technologies are doing to see how we can bring them back into education. So there's a gentleman who worked for Yahoo, Google in India. He's from India in his background. And he's now in the school world, K-12 world, collecting hundreds of thousands of learning lessons and items, and they are creating a system. You should look for it. It's called Guru, and I can get you the spelling later, but it's spelled G-R-O-O-U.org. Guru.org. I think this might be one of the first search engines with available content that's set up for education specifically. And you know, the way Google and Yahoo and Bing work is that they're beauty contests, meaning that the terms that are looked up most come up first. So if you're looking at some very, remote kind of piece of DNA interaction, it's going to be way hard to find in a Google search. That search for education and academia has to get better. And the language and translation parts, as you know, are already very good. All right, how we organize. So competencies, measuring competencies, what does somebody know and what can they do? Being able to have students know multiple disciplines. At the same time they're going through university, they may want to get a Microsoft training course. So how they're organizing their lives are really important. One of the critical things that we think is that right now, a student integrates or brings together their world inside an education institution. Yet they're looking at multiple information sources. The student doesn't have anything that manages their learning in the university, outside the university, and with other people. So eventually, although you have a sign-on to your Twitter account or a sign-on to your Facebook account, there is no learning in the broadest sense account yet. When that happens, and that will happen, there will be a lot of change. And I know when I was at Blackboard, we talked about building that Blackboard student account where they would keep all their learning, because that's something that will fundamentally change things. Education is the only piece of the world now that you can't log on and get something. It used to be a nightmare to get a driver's license or your license plates renewed in California. It's all online now. I couldn't even believe it. So how we organize is changing. And then on economics and where our skills come from. We all know today that you can't get trained for a job you're going to do 20 years from now. You have to get trained in multiple different ways. So how that happens and how you, as educators or people administering technology, help that student become very mobile in the world is really important. So the future of the university is right now the university is a control agent. Because of history, the place has been where we've organized all these things. The discipline knowledge, although there's plenty of knowledge on the web about every discipline, a home for faculty members who have, although they have a job in a college or university, they also have a subject area specialty that goes to where everybody else is. So they have a horizontal relationship in their subject matter. They have a vertical relationship in their institution. That right now, again, they do it from their base in the university. Students, I just spoke about, and then degrees. I mean, there's a real question of whether the university degree is the only instrument to tell a company you know what you're doing as you graduate. So we're seeing in the States, we're seeing a little bit in Europe, more and more about a transcript / portfolio where an employer or higher education can look at this set of activities you've done and say, wow, that's pretty interesting. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. So just getting the degree, I would say within 3 to 5 years, is not going to be enough. Also, we know that because of the competition from social media and so forth, that many students aren't going to complete their higher education the way they used to. And we still have to reach large numbers. And then the question is, what does the employer want? They want to know that somebody knows that they can do a job, or that they can present themselves to the public, or they can interact with technology. So we're going to see, I think, certificates become more important in smaller areas. We're going to see corporations wanting to measure how well somebody can continually learn, how they can work in groups, how they can interact with people. So that world's not going to stay exactly the same. So how do we get, can we build credit banks? Can we build different ways of transcripts? So these are things that I think you'll see more of. Right now, in systems like Blackboard, there's an outcome system that's looking at the institution's measurement of these things. But how will that come back and affect the student? And then, I've talked about this a little bit, is the job of the university just to produce employees? I was fortunate in my first year in 2005 at Blackboard to be invited to a congresso of master's degree students who were teachers, who were getting their teacher's master's degree, offered online by the Tech in Monterey. And once a year, they bring everybody together, maybe 900 students every year. And I thought, well, it's very interesting that they're going home with a master's degree. It would be even more interesting if they got into a learning network with each other over time so that they could, if they were math teachers or English teachers or whatever their subject, they could communicate with each other. They could then help other teachers in the area. So we're often not doing enough. We're looking at online education, but we're not thinking about how networks operate. So that's really important. I think it's important going into the future. And then, what aspect of the university is going to be on the ground? What's going to be in the cloud? Do you have to control everything in the cloud? Big question. So right now, everything in that brown box, the university controls. Coming up very quickly is going to be the fact that these pieces might be managed somewhat separately. All right, so you may not have the best faculty member. If you think about it as a distribution problem, if you're distributing food in a new brand and you want it to go everywhere in Mexico, there are distribution channels for that. If you want the best chemistry faculty members at every university in the country, you're not going to be able to do it. There are enough of them. And if they're trained to be able to do that, they may not want to teach. So the distribution question is really an important one. So you may bring in one of those MOOCs to do some of your stuff. You may be in a network with other universities here and in other countries where you're sharing some of that teaching. So those boundaries are going to have to loosen up. We don't have the money in the world anymore to run each institution as a separate island. It's just not going to be possible. So again, going back to that framework, we're looking at how the students managed, how the content's managed, how the degrees managed, and how the work's managed. And you could see a line going from work on the back end of that right back into that student who becomes a lifelong learner. So from the point of view of our institute, we work with universities and with schools to begin to look at these issues. So the University of California, Santa Cruz is an institution that's very close to our national lab. And we're beginning to look at problems together. Let's give you one example. In the United States or anywhere, to support students, the support for that student to be a good learner, about 30% of it comes from inside the school. 70% comes from the family and the community. If the family is not able to help that student, whether it's because they don't have enough money for health care, they don't have enough money for social services, or that student has gotten in trouble with the law, there's separate agencies that manage that life of that student. Now, that was okay when it was just an institution. Now, they're collecting data, and they're taking that kid, and they're pulling them apart. School's got data on the kid. Social agency has data on the child. Criminal justice system has. Nobody's bringing that data back together again. So one of the things we're doing, Silicon Valley, one of the richest places in the world, also has some of the greatest poverty in the world. And part of what we're doing is getting the university to help us from different departments, engineering, the social sciences, to work together on these issues. Okay, so a little bit on the practical side we went through. And what I really want you to think about today is there are different models. We've done different models in every other thing we've done. We used to go to the bank every day. Now we go online every day. We're changing our patterns, but not in education. So I'll finish up with one section here. It's how does the university think about itself in the future? And those of you who manage technology, I'm really saying think about it in a much wider sense. Realize that the person in the academic section of the university has to be able to understand what you're doing with the technology because you're trying to reach kids to make a better place. And they're sort of in this world on the left, and then that little question mark on the right is where's the button we're going to push when we just need to know something that has to do with learning. That hasn't happened yet. So I'm going to give you sort of 3 levels of a model. We're in the traditional education model today. So the input is a general education. The output, hopefully, is specific skills and knowledge. The consequence is that you can maintain the society we have today. So the question might be, is the society we have today the one we want? The transitional, which I would say most of the people in this room are involved in some way, is where we're bringing in technologies to do some of the things we did before, but to do them better. Okay, we're not doing them differently particularly. We're not changing what we're doing. We're just changing how we're doing it. So again, the input might be more research. Might be 20th century skills. The output, hopefully, are students who can innovate and operate in a fast-moving, changing world. The consequence is that we're working on building new sets of understanding about culture and new kinds of business. Finally, the transformational, the part that we're working on in our institution, is the input is what do we want to, what kind of society do we want to get? So what are those inputs? The idea of global stewardship is that increasingly the problems that we're going to confront are problems that confront the entire world. So whether it's cybercrime or global environmental change or disease, these are things that we have to confront together. They have nothing to do with national boundaries at this point. And then finally, collective fitness. How do we all operate in the world together as population gets larger and then at a certain point begins to get smaller? And finally, how will the technology evolve? So right now, in the traditional world, we use technologies in a very ad hoc way. We just, we use some things for some things. Things are thrown together. There might be some planning, and we know that that planning will only last a little while. The transitional phase is where we're beginning to standardize those technologies. And we know that that process is ongoing. So 5 years ago, when you had your Blackboard account, it might not interact with how you registered your students or how you did other things. Today, all of that works. So we've gotten past that integration point, and if there are problems, we can get past it further. But the learner is not in the center. They may be in the center of your focus as instructors or people that are getting technology, but that learner doesn't come away with something where they've got their learning. They get a grade in a course, but they don't take home the information that was in that course in some digital way. They might have taken notes. They might have some chapters, some books. They're not actually right in the center. The transformational is when we're beginning to reinvent society. And when I say identity-driven, the technology knows who the students are. The technology knows what the students have touched. They take a more active role. So there's a social technology education linkage that needs to happen. A student who goes onto Facebook or goes onto Twitter knows how to manage their technology. They know who they've tweeted with or who they're in their Facebook collection. They know those things. All right, we haven't come up with an identity-driven portion for education. And part of the thing is that students today, and historically, just like the beer-drinking students in Paris, they run the range from passive learners to aggressive learners. They show up every day or don't show up. They make a decision every couple minutes. Oh, well, I put some time and energy into this. Well, they need to put more time and energy. In other words, they need to help lift themselves up, but they need the tools to do it. Tools like Blackboard help, but in the future of Blackboard and other companies, there'll be identity-driven tools. What if you begin to get points? What if you get feedback? What if you collect things that show that you're on a career trajectory, that you're 80% to the point where you might be able to get an IT job? We don't have those tools yet in education, but they exist elsewhere. And then you'll see services, as you're already seeing them, move into the cloud. And the difference is that when in an institution, a student or others use multiple technologies, they're integrated at some level. It's either in the cloud or in your network. When that point of integration comes down to the student, it's going to be, a little bit of a different story. So again, to kind of wrap up, we have technology, we have the learner, and we have education. And we need to be in a process to rethink that. And oftentimes, it takes a bit of boldness to push these conversations a little further. But the recipients of these conversations are students who will do better and societies which will do better. And it's sort of all of our responsibility to push in that direction. So future directions for higher education. Know that changes are coming. And simply doing online learning, as we've seen through the MOOCs and some of the, is already becoming traditional. The British Open University, I don't know how many of you know it, they've been doing online education for years, and before that they sent tape recorders out. They're 30 years old, 32 years old now. They're considered already old-fashioned and traditional in the UK, although they're a good institution. And finally, are you simply using technology as a tool, or does it go to this next part of how we promote a process where you have much more social involvement with your students, and you let them carry some of the weight. So anyway, you can look up our organization. It's nlet.org. It's mostly focused on schools and community colleges in the United States. Our focus on universities is to get universities to work on the pipeline, if you will, of better students coming out of school. So I can tell you, in California, the kids who graduate from high school, when they go into community college, most of them, like 80, 90%, either need remedial or developmental education in English, and that's for English speakers, native English speakers as well, in writing, which is a skill that is getting worse and worse, and certainly in math. I mean, we've made math very difficult. The United States is more phobic with math than probably any country in the world. Can't really explain why. Anyway, there's my email. You are welcome to email me, and I will open it up if anybody here has a question. And I'm done.
Agradecemos a Gordon Freeman su participación y abrimos en este momento un espacio de preguntas y respuestas para cualquier persona del auditorio que quiera realizarla directamente. Adelante. A la gente de staff, si nos puede apoyar con el micrófono, por favor.
Hi, Dr. Freeman. Thank you for your conference. In the transformational model that you exposed, who decides the standards in technology and the identity-driven? In which direction?
You're speaking English, right?
En español se lo pregunto.
Okay, all right, okay.
Que
No, let
en
me
el
hear
modelo transformacional que usted nos ha expuesto, ¿quién decide los estándares en la tecnología que se plantean y la dirección de la identidad que se va a construir en torno a ellos? Podría uno pensar, por lo que se ha expuesto, que básicamente en la dirección de pues una mayor productividad, un mejor empleo, pero creo que habría otras metas muy importantes en el plano de pues el ámbito de lo humano, del empoderamiento de las personas, de la transformación de la sociedad. ¿Cuál es su punto de vista?
It's a very good question. So I think what we see is that we tend to think about the human condition and about access and identity after the fact. So in my model, on the identity model, we would begin to think about those as the end goal. So how do you make that a fully participating student from the beginning? And so those are conversations and interactions that we're actually having. So in the United States, we have, with our English language learners, primarily from Mexico and other places in Latin America, they have a very difficult time in math. And they have a difficult time in math because they don't understand the language, all right? So we're now going down and saying, at those early levels, can we enable that student to be able to manage their learning and see what they're learning so that they can raise questions, or if they don't do well on tests, they can interact with teachers but also with mentors. So the idea is, you're absolutely right, the end goal has to be the beginning of that identity discussion. What has not worked is for us in institutions to say, oh, we need more access and we'll go do a program for that. Because programs, after a while, go away. The people go to different places, the agency changes, the funding drops. So the notion is to begin with that student. Some of it in education and some of it not. But a very good question. I'm happy to talk to you more about it.
Por ahí hay una pregunta más. Le pedimos a la gente de staff, por favor.
Buenos días, gracias por su interesante charla. A mí me da una duda muy grande al hablar de productividad. Obviamente yo sí creo en el aprendizaje electrónico, sí creo en la educación a distancia, pero con tantos distractores que tenemos en línea, Nuestros jóvenes en la universidad de repente dedican un 80% del tiempo que se sientan frente a una computadora a las redes sociales, a los chats, a otras actividades personales, y el 20% a la cuestión académica. Entonces, a mí se me haría muy importante, en su opinión, cómo nosotros podemos contextualizar al alumno para que vea las posibilidades de la tecnología en la educación. Yo, por ejemplo, llevo años investigando esto y siempre sale lo mismo. El chico no identifica las bondades de la tecnología en la enseñanza al 100%. ¿Por qué? Por los distractores. Son muchos. No sé qué porcentaje, ahora en la actualidad, la verdad, ya no estoy actualizada. Hace tiempo escuché que el 80% de contenidos en línea pues eran cosas de promocionales, de ventas, y tan solo el 20% de los contenidos en línea eran académicos o por lo menos rescatables, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo podemos manejar esto con nuestros jóvenes? Principalmente por la cuestión esta de la productividad.
Okay, very good question. So if you see on this chart that on the bottom I've got Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn off to one end, and I have this question mark over the other. The big understanding that I came to is that all learning is social. Right? So if you're sitting in a classroom and you're interacting, it's social. If you're doing it online, it's social. We have tended to divide up what's online and what's in the classroom as different entities. So our feeling is those have to become similar. Now, for productivity, there would be no reason in the technology, and you begin to research this, that if a student's working off of a smartphone or a tablet, that as they depart their learning or they start doing something else, there's no reason why there can't be a little feedback meter that tells them you've only put in X number of hours, and in order to be productive, you're going to need Y. I mean, we do this in the business context all the time. So there's been a missing piece of productivity software or webware that would continually focus that student back. I've often wanted to have something. We know statistically that the more education you get in certain education, the larger your income potential is in life. You could easily have a meter that says you've only put in 10 minutes, you should put in an hour. You could see it go down from a job that's going to give you, X hundreds of thousands of pesos or dollars, and you could see it go down. We have not been very inventive. And so, again, I think we've tried to go and expand out from where the university and learning is today into the virtual world. We need to turn around and say, what do we need as an outcome, and what range of technologies can we bring and apply to that? So I think there's going to be a flip, and there should be, from thinking about how we do more efficiently what we already do. The flip is going to be to what do we actually need to do, and what's the full menu now of things I can draw on to do that. There's a new science will have to kind of emerge to do that, but it's a great area for universities to do more time in. Thanks.
Tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más. De este lado, por favor, si nos apoya la gente de staff. Gracias.
Gracias. Buenos días, doctor. En este modelo transformador que usted está proponiendo, ¿quién y cómo se construye toda la propuesta didáctica? ¿A partir de qué o quién organiza los contenidos, las estrategias de enseñanza, etcétera, etcétera, que garanticen que este modelo o desde esta propuesta realmente haya un proceso de enseñanza y aprendizaje para los alumnos?
Very good question. I have a very simple answer. So we have a position in most universities called the CIO, the Chief Information Officer. I would take that title and I would change what the I stands for. And I would create, I think it's time, to create a new position or to change that position to the Chief Innovation Officer. And I think that the provosts and your rectors or presidents have to empower that person to have these conversations across the different silos. So I think there should be a process. I absolutely think that students need to be in that conversation. So we need a new structure. And it doesn't mean that you have to change what's being done, but there has to be, it's very hard for people to walk out of what they do and say, let's do something a little differently. It's scary. On the other hand, I think modern institutions need to reward the people that take those chances. That's what we do in business. So my answer is that you need to have an innovation department or office or officer on a campus. It's not just about the information and technology anymore. It's about making these things I've talked about work.
Gracias, doctor. Una pregunta relacionada con los profesores. Los profesores normalmente son de una generación distinta de la de los alumnos. ¿Usted cree que en este nuevo entorno es necesario y es apropiado el entrenamiento de profesores o más bien el cambio generacional de profesores?
I think the true answer is generational. I think that in the process, the professor can actually bring the students into the conversation because not every professor or teacher needs to know how to do everything with technology. There are plenty of people, and I think by empowering that student to assist in the process, what would work best for you? Here's what I do traditionally, but I realize there are different ways for this information to get out. Can we work together? So there's been very little of that because we continue to put the student here and we put the professor here, yet we now know that we're living in this different kind of social environment where a student might be able to teach some aspect of what you're providing as well or better. So I think that the larger answer is generational, but it has to be the case that the older generation, as the new teachers and faculty come in and the younger administrators, that it's understood this is part of the process. It's not optional. Now, at the same time, there's kind of a bounce back phenomena that we have to be aware of. There are certain students that are going back to the basics. There are certain students that are actually using notebooks and pens and papers. So this thing is not a complete trajectory into solid technology. There are still things that you're going to see emerging where people mix the old and the new. But the big answer is generational, but it's only going to be generational if you give the guidance and support to those young faculty to do that experimentation. Thank you.
Agradecemos a Gordon Freeman y le pedimos, por favor, a Víctor Bravo, haga entrega también de este obsequio para nuestro conferencista en esta ocasión. Por favor, brindémosle un fuerte aplauso.
Thank you, sir.